in every form. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. I want to point out that the CSIS study that's been mentioned here and repeated ad nauseum excluded violence at protests from their study, allowing them to systematically ignore Antifa and Black Lives Matter riots. But they did make an exception for Charlottesville, interestingly. Even using their flawed methodology, CSIS recently reported that left-wing violence in 2025 outpaces right-wing violence. Imagine how much bigger that disparity would be if they actually weren't cooking the books. So without objection, I move to enter into the record an article by Tim Carney explaining CIS's biased methodology. Without objection, will be entered into the record. We'll start with questionings. Mr. Knowles, I want to start with you. You're not going to have any bigger proponent of free speech than me, given especially what I did in my last job and this one. I believe in it wholeheartedly. I think it's the First Amendment is the beating heart of our Constitution. But what we're really talking about here is conduct, of course, violent conduct. And you've talked about you can't really have this competition in the marketplace if the marketplace is being destroyed and shot up in many instances. How do we get at this problem? What's the road forward in your view?
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I'm your independent political analyst, no spin, no tribal loyalty, just facts, context, and balanced commentary. Today, we're breaking down a tense Senate hearing chaired by Senator Dick Durbin, focus on political violence, free speech, and whether Antifa should be treated as a terrorist organization. Let's get into it.
We might be able to find a little bipartisan agreement if we acknowledge something that both parties at different times have acknowledged, which is that marketplaces of ideas or any other kind of marketplace only function when there are rules and when we abide by those rules. You can't have a marketplace if bandits keep shooting up the marketplace. And this is why it's so important to identify where the threats to the marketplace have really been coming from. Have we seen left-wing speakers shouted down on campuses? Have we seen left-wing events interrupted by terrorists? Rarely so, if ever. I can't think of an occasion. I am amused that Senator Durbin began by warning against pointing to one side or the other, making this a partisan issue, before beginning one of the most partisan invectives that I have ever heard. But I'm not even opposed to a partisan invective here, because I think it is very important that we identify where the threats are. I think any honest Democrat even would have to acknowledge, as the Atlantic magazine did, as even CSIS has acknowledged, that the threats today to the free marketplace of ideas come from the left. And so, in order to restore the open marketplace of ideas, the healthy exchange of ideas, essential to our self-government, we must regulate where the problem is. And today, the problem lies on the left.
Thank you. Mr. Wolf, I want to ask you, and thank you for your service. A common refrain is that Antifa is an ideology, not an organization. Could you talk about, in your experience, how that is complete and utter nonsense, that this is actually a pretty well-coordinated organization with safe houses and money that's laundered internationally, quite frankly, not just domestically?
Yeah, well, I think we've seen that across the country. I think the indictment by the Department of Justice in Texas talks about the Antifa cell there in North Texas, about how they do coordinate, how they do pool their resources. I saw it firsthand in Portland, although it was very difficult to prove at the time. Those types of anarchists and others there being well organized, being well funded, being resupplied daily, not that they were doing that themselves, but that they had help. And so as you look across the spectrum here, is Antifa like other organizations? Does it have a hierarchy and an org chart and everything else? No, it's very different. But that doesn't make it any less dangerous. That doesn't say, and that shouldn't mean from a law enforcement perspective, well, let's not actually investigate. Let's not actually start to look at who these individuals are, how they're organized, how they're funded, how they're financed. Just because they're decentralized doesn't make them any less threatening.
Thank you. Mr. Scheidler, I'm going to go to you and pick up on that point because you alluded to it in your testimony. Understanding what Antifa is and its connections and organization, what are some suggestions you might have of how we could get at this problem of this radical organization hell-bent on destroying America? I mean, this is their stated mission. How do we get about that?
Well, I'm a firm supporter of the president's recommendation to target Antifa as a foreign terrorist organization. There are a number of Antifa organizations that operate across Western Europe and Latin America, which would be justified. We would be justified in designating as a foreign terrorist organization. There are also a number of networks which provide material support, including the one that I mentioned in my testimony, and that is a very common method in which Antifa receives support. Much like, for example, Islamic State or Al-Qaeda, where they host media outlets like Dabiq and Inspire, which will give you both ideological instructions as to how to become Antifa, what you need to believe and how you need to believe it. They also provide instructions on what you should do if you wish to be Antifa, including how you should organize, how you can avoid arrest, what encrypted apps to use, what websites to use. They'll also provide instructions on how to destroy critical infrastructure, including 5G wireless communications, and how to derail trains. As, for example, the website It's Going Down did in a case that was related to two anarchists in the Pacific Northwest that derailed a number of trains in which the federal government was able to achieve a conviction. So these networks can be targeted for engaging in material support for terrorism. We are not talking about speech. We are talking about manifestos describing how to overthrow the government and how to do that with violence.
Thank you. And President Trump has designated Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization, and I've written to Secretary Rubio for the foreign terrorist organization, and we'll see what happens with that. Ranking Member Welch.
So this hearing opened with Senator Durbin being accused of referencing a CSIS study, that's the Center for Strategic and International Studies, which tracks domestic extremism in the U.S. A Republican senator pushed back hard, claiming that CSIS excluded left-wing protest violence like Antifa and BLM riots, while highlighting right-wing events such as Charlottesville. He argued that even using that supposedly flawed methodology, CSIS found that left-wing violence in 2025 actually outpaced right-wing violence. Now, from an analytical perspective, this is a crucial point. The definition of political violence matters. If protest-related violence is excluded or included inconsistently, it can heavily influence the narrative about which side is more violent. So when either party cites these numbers, it's important to ask how they're being counted. Next, conservative commentator Michael Knowles was called as a witness. He emphasized the importance of the First Amendment and described free speech as the beating heart of the Constitution. But he also pointed out that the marketplace of ideas can't function if it's being shot up in other words, if violence or intimidation silences one side. Knowles argued that today's biggest threats to open debate and free expression are coming from the political left citing campus protests, speaker disruptions, and media bias. Now, while there's truth that left-wing activism has sometimes crossed into suppression of opposing views, it's also true that right-wing political violence, including militia actions and politically motivated attacks, remains a major concern according to federal agencies. So, a fair analysis here is that both extremes pose threats to democratic discourse just in different ways. Then, the discussion turned toward Antifa, and this is where things got intense. Former DHS Secretary Chad Wolf rejected the common claim that Antifa is just an ideology. He said, based on his experience, that it operates as a coordinated network with safe houses, resource pooling, and even money moving across borders. He cited a DOJ indictment in Texas and his own time in Portland as examples of Antifa's coordination. Now, that does line up with some evidence that certain anarchist or Antifa-affiliated groups organize regionally. But it's also true that Antifa isn't a traditional organization. There's no central leadership, no unified command, and no official membership. It's a decentralized movement, which makes it harder for law enforcement to treat it like a structured terrorist network. The next witness, Mr. Schneiderler, went a step further. He suggested the U.S. should designate Antifa as a foreign terrorist organization, comparing its online propaganda ecosystem to extremist groups like ISIS or Al-Qaeda. That's a striking comparison. While some Antifa-linked materials do promote radical and violent tactics, including sabotage or targeting infrastructure, scale, scope, and intent differ dramatically from jihadist terrorism. Still, his underlying concern that digital networks are being used to radicalize and mobilize is valid. We've seen similar online ecosystems drive violence on both the far left and the far right. So what's really happening here? This hearing illustrates a larger trend, how both parties frame political violence through their own lens. Senator Durbin's side tends to focus on right-wing extremism and domestic terrorism, while his Republican colleagues are highlighting Antifa and left-wing radicalism. Both issues are real and both deserve scrutiny. But if the goal is to protect the marketplace of ideas, as Knowles put it, then we have to reject violence and intimidation across the board, not just when it comes from our political opponents. That's my breakdown of Senator Dick Durbin's hearing on political violence and Antifa. There are some fair points, some political posturing, and a lot of strong opinions on both sides. What do you think? Should Antifa be formally labeled a terrorist organization, or would that cross a constitutional line? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more balanced political analysis. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.